Hi. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to SciPy 2015. I hope everyone is having a good conference. So yeah, my talk today is Story Time with Bokeh. Not exactly the talk I had originally imagined in complete detail, but I wanted to tell both data stories that people are using Bokeh to tell, but also sort of the story of what Bokeh is, what's been going on with Bokeh in the last year. So quickly, first, let's go ahead and talk about maybe what's been going on since last year. So Bokeh, as you probably know, is a visualization system geared towards visualizations in the browser from Python or other languages. And a lot's been going on in the last year. So we have a lot of new tools that people have asked for, things like sophisticated selection tools, lasso and point and poly selections, hover tool for lines, feature that people have asked for quite a while. We've also done a design pass, so we have a much sort of improved visual design, especially the toolbar. We'll see some examples of that in a minute, so I won't spend too much time on it. Docs. So we've also heard people talking about docs and asking about docs. So we've made a lot of passes and improvements to the docs. So happy to say that the reference guide is now 100% complete, auto-generated. All of the properties, all of the models are all completely generated. But also the user guide has been very drastically and dramatically expanded. In fact, why don't I go ahead and just maybe show a quick example. So if you take a look at the user's guide today, you'll see quite a lot of different sections. And many of these come with live plots, right? So if you go to instance for styling visual attributes here, you'll see not only descriptions of what can be changed, but live plot examples with code examples and how to change all of that directly in the doc. So hopefully that will allow people to get a better opportunity to change and to find out what they need. So the next thing we also added recently was a callback mechanism for adding sophisticated interactions to static plots. So we have this Bokeh server notion, and it's really great. We're refining it a little bit currently, and more about that in a bit. But we have this notion for callbacks that allows you to add a lot of interesting capabilities, and we'll see some examples of that in a second as well. And last but not least, our Bokeh happened last year as well, so I don't want to forget to mention also Scala and Julia and Lua bindings exist for Bokeh, and of course JS bindings. But our Bokeh, I think, was the really big one that happened last year. So you can actually generate Bokeh plots and Bokeh visualizations directly from our Bokeh. Okay. So what about the present day? So I also really want to talk about what people are doing today, right? And give examples of sort of the kinds of things people can generate with Bokeh today. So last year came and talked about Bokeh a lot, showed a lot of sort of demos and speculative things that weren't necessarily available. So everything I want to show today is something that people are doing today, or you could run today, or anyone could run today. First, though, to set the stage, just a little bit of interest about sort of where Bokeh's been and where it's going. So this was 1 year ago today. Really pleased at the time to see those numbers on GitHub and those sort of download numbers. But today, you can see that that's kind of crazy and very humbling. And I know those download numbers are probably inflated, but even if they're 1/10 of that, I'm still humbled by all the interest in Bokeh. And of course, all this wouldn't be possible without a really fantastic team. And that's another thing that's really been exciting over the last years. We've had the opportunity to bring on a lot of new people to help out. So not everyone here is working on Bokeh full-time. In fact, probably no one is really working on it full-time, but all of these people are working on it in some capacity. Folks that are working with clients to incorporate Bokeh into applications on site, bringing that information, that feedback back, and helping to smooth out the rough edges and improve Bokeh over time. We have people like Omar Klein working on some WebGL integration. We have Damien, of course, helping with our build and packaging, doing an amazing job of automation there. We have some design help with Sarah Schnatt. Sarah Bird gave that amazing PyCon talk about Bokeh. She's come on to help as well. So lots and lots of folks. Peter, of course, broke the symmetry of my nice arrangement here, so we put him off to the side. He doesn't code anymore anyway, so that's okay. But anyway, so what are some things that we can do today? So one thing that's really important is this idea of, again, static documents but dynamic interaction. So this is something that Sarah Bird put together. It's a recreation of the Hans Reising's demo from, I think it was a TED Talk many years ago, and it's this idea of showing mortality versus sort of the birth rate. And so this is actually something you can do in Bokeh. In a static document, you can just email it to someone. You don't need any kind of application or any kind of server. So let me go ahead and try to pull that up as well. So here, if I go to nbviewer.org, this is in one of our tutorial notebooks, and so this is that reproduction. And again, you can move the slider and you can see the evolution of this change. And this is just purely a static document. Again, you could email this to someone. You don't need any kind of server or anything to support that. It just works right out of the box. Okay. go back. So that's nice. And so that's powered by this new JS callback action. So the idea is, we're relenting a little bit on the idea of you don't have to write any JavaScript, because if you're willing to write just a couple of lines of JavaScript, they get you a lot of capability for just a fairly marginal cost. But the good news is, on top of that, is that as we get a lot of people using this, and there are a lot of folks excited about it, we can sort of recognize what are common patterns, and we can encapsulate those so that we actually get back to not having to write any JavaScript. And so that's definitely the goal. One day I'd love to actually just be able to write callbacks for these things directly in Python and translate them into JavaScript. Maybe Python is something we can leverage, or maybe we can get someone interested to come work on that. I think it's a really interesting problem. I would love to work on that. I don't have time. So if anyone thinks that's a really cool problem, please come let us know and come work on it. I think that'd be really cool. Definitely a lot of information, though, on interactions at the user's guide, that new section. So there's a lot of examples of all the different callbacks you can add in the various different places to Bokeh plots to power different kinds of interactions and static documents. Next thing I want to show is something I showed last year, but I want to sort of show it updated for this year. And so that's this spectrogram example. So last year I showed this, and it was kind of cool, and that's great. So let's go ahead and take a look at it as well. Go ahead and go to Safari. And now if we go to the spectrogram, and so you can see it's been updated. It's a little bit big for this screen, I guess. But this is, reading the mic on my microphone, doing an FFT, it computes the power spectrum here. But what's really interesting and important about this, why I'm sort of revisiting it, is because it's seen quite a bit of updating. And so let's talk about what is sort of new about it. And that really is that, one, it's completely customizable and stylable. It's really easy to embed Bokeh plots and visualizations and widgets in your own templates. So if you're creating a web app, you have complete control over that. So last year it was just fairly blank white web page with a few plots thrown into it. That's just really to show that you can generate whatever templates you want and embed things however you need to or however you want. Obviously there's been some performance improvements as well. So last year, I think if you go watch the video, you can sort of see there was some stuttering and some tearing and things, it was okay, but not so great. But now it's quite a bit better. So there's been quite a lot of work put into improving the performance in various areas of Bokeh. But lastly, and perhaps most importantly, is that it's almost purely Python now. So last year, there was a whole bunch of front-end JavaScript code. We were sort of interfacing with Bokeh.js, the client library, directly. I think there was something like 600 lines of CoffeeScript, right? So it's kind of cool to look at, but not something you'd actually want to write. And so we're not there completely yet. This is sort of a proxy app for us, or sort of a touchstone that we keep coming back to, because as we evolve it and move it towards being written in just a little bit of Python, we are able to advance the broader goals of Bokeh. And so that's why I sort of keep liking to come back to it. Okay. The next thing I want to show is an app that's actually in use by our Xdata team, and I don't have a chance to show it, unfortunately, because it's not something I can really bring in, but it's got a little bit of video here, and I can talk about what's going on. So this just shows a nice dashboard that actually exists. It's got all kinds of tools, interaction tools, dialogues that you can pop up. You can see the new line inspector that's there. You can turn on and off features using the widgets down below. And so that's also on YouTube. You can see a little bit more of that. So this is referred to as FEAT, the Financial Event Analysis Tool, and it's being evaluated by some departments in the US government as part of the Xdata initiative. And they're using it to basically search for financial fraud. So they're examining lots of different sources of information, feeding that through a back end that does all kinds of processing, and then that feeds it to this front end application, this FEAT application, to allow analysts to try to look for things that are anomalous, signs of fraudulent activity, that sort of thing. And the main thing that I really want to stress, though, is that this is just out-of-the-box features, Bokeh 0.9.1. There's nothing sort of special, or anyone could write that dashboard today. There's nothing that was sort of not in the repository. Okay. And another thing I want to revisit, this was also something last year that we sort of showed off, and there's a new version here. And the reason that I think it's also important to show this is because last year this was just kind of demoware, and no one could really run it. It existed kind of on I think a DigitalOcean box at the time. It was this idea of having this data cube of ocean data, ocean temperature data rather, that you could interactively explore, even though it's, I think it's like a 5 gig data cube. So let's take a look at that as well. See how it does over conference Wi-Fi. So here, if I go to my Ocean tab, so this is that nice thing. Here I can do the slider for time, but let me drag that. And so this is now running on an EC2 instance. And again, it's about a 5 gig data cube. I can slide through time and see it update. But I can also move up here and get my box zoom tool, and I can zoom in, and I can see progressive refinement occur, sort of see the data update and see the recolor mapping at a fairly good rate. There's still, I think, optimizations we can perform here to improve that experience. But the main thing about this is that anyone can run this now. So let me go ahead and go back to the slides here. What's different from a year ago to today is this is the script that I ran to get that plot, right? It's a fairly small chunk of code that anyone could run today. It uses the recent Ajax data source that allows you to pull any Ajax REST endpoint you want for data and incorporate that directly into a Bokeh plot in the client. Still a little bit too much JS in there. We're working on that. As I mentioned, we have this facility for callbacks now, but as we move on, we want to be able to identify common use cases and be able to encapsulate those and present those as just actions that anyone can use directly by spelling them in Python. So I expect that middle chunk, that little JavaScript callback, to actually disappear in the near future. And so that's a very small amount of code. And the actual Flask server that we wrote to serve up this data set, I think Matt Rockland wrote the little Dask code to do the coarsening, the downsampling, and one little function. And I threw together a Flask server, in 10 minutes. It was about 15 lines of code or something. Super easy to put that together. So speaking of Dask, this is a cool little visualization as well. This was put together by Jim Christ, who I think gave a Dask talk earlier today. And basically, Dask has the ability to, so if you don't know what it is, it's a scheduler for basically distributed arrays and tasks over those arrays. So Dask has the ability to generate these dot files for GraphViz that can show what is the execution, how is it going to be broken up across different tasks and different processors. And so Jim actually threw this together, and this was awesome because I love when people put things together with Bokeh that I just hadn't even thought of myself. He read in the dot file and actually translated all of that to Bokeh glyphs and Bokeh primitives. That's not like an image of a GraphViz image. That's actually all of those are live Bokeh objects. And so you can imagine putting selections and highlighting all those things. And so I'm looking forward to having, for instance, live monitoring of Dask. He has some other plots he may have shown in his talk of CPU utilization during Dask operations. So I think that'd be really cool to get that. You can find out more about Dask on the link there at the bottom. Okay, so those are some things that are going on today. And again, I really want to stress those are things that are running today on code. You can find the example either in the repository or it's something you could write yourself with features that are in the recently released 0.9.1. There's no sort of future work that's required to get that running. But I do want to talk a little bit about the direction that Bokeh's in and some of the future work. So let's maybe take a second or a minute or two and talk about that. So one thing that people have asked for a lot is LaTeX annotations, and that's actually a priority that we're going to make very high on the list in the near future, probably for maybe a 0.10 or 0.11 release. If you've ever seen it, there's a repository called Kotech. It's basically Khan Academy's version of a math tech library, and it's seen a flurry of activity recently. Their GitHub has been exploding, and so it's very lightweight sort of math text. And so I think we're going to try to integrate that in the very near future to be able to have math tech expressions in Bokeh plots. Static output, another feature people have requested. Surprisingly thorny and tricky technical detail. We're still looking at options for that, but it's also risen to sort of the top of the priority list. A couple of avenues there we're going to look into are either an MPL backend, which would be great to leverage all of the time that's gone into generating static images from MPL, or possibly maybe a Cairo backend. We'll see what happens. New charts and fasting, that's in progress. So Nick Roth and Fabio Pleijer are going to be working extensively on that in the near future. Fabio's sort of winding down on one project, and he's about to start really ramping up on finishing out our charts interface. So we've had some experimentation that's been going on in the Bokeh.charts interface, and we're trying to get to a point of stability and move that forward and sort of completion. Validation as well. One of the problems with Bokeh is because it's this object graph architecture where you put together an object graph and you serialize that and you ship it to the client to have it reproduced, it's sometimes possible to put together object graphs that aren't meaningful or have problems with them. So we've added some new validation features starting in 0.9.1 that'll actually warn you if you've forgotten to add something here or something there, you're misusing some data object some way. You can get a lot better information about that besides just having, for instance, a blank screen when you open up your browser. So that started in 9.1. We haven't turned on sort of raising exceptions for errors yet, but we will do that very soon. The next thing, I'm going to give a quick sort of a teaser. Some stuff that we're going to be working on in the near future as well, some authoring tools for creating sort of dashboards and being able to interact very easily with Bokeh. So let's see if I've got this one up and running as well. Spline text, too many windows. So pretty constrained for space here. So I'm going to tease this. We'll maybe try to have a lightning talk on this later, but the idea here is, I've just got an editor open and I've got my plot open, and I just change that and I save it, and sure enough, a little while later, my plot updates. So maybe I can say I want to change my orientation on my axes labels, and I want to change this to have no outline for the markers. So there's a lot of cool stuff that can happen with this, and there's a lot of sort of stuff we plan to build on this very, sort of modest start of this technology. to allow people to author interesting documents and iterate on them very quickly in the browser. So we'll come back to that. Okay, what else? Another thing I want to mention is we are going to be revamping the server a bit. So we had a lot of big ideas for the server, but we want to try to focus it just a little bit. And the main thing is we want to narrow it down and get it to its core competency, which is basically this thing, one sentence, right? So it's an extensible facility for reflective persistent RPC. And if we do that right, what that gives us is the ability to break Bokeh.js up, because it's become a little bit of a large JS library, so we can make people only have to sort of pay for what they use, but also allow everyone to not be dependent on us. So people can create their own custom models. If you want to wrap, some JavaScript widget, library du jour, you could do that, and you could integrate it very easily with Bokeh. It gives people that capability. So that work is underway as well. Also, we want to push the other language facilities of Bokeh. Ryan Hafen's been putting our Bokeh support into Telescope. We really want to push Java and also work on some JS binding. So if you have interest in JS, no Angular and React, please let us know. We'd love to get more help there. And also WebGL. So Almar Klein is working on this. That work's underway. I hope to have it merged in the next few months. Finally, a big goal for this year is a 1.0 release. I don't know exactly when, but later on towards the end of this year. And then just to wrap up, please install Bokeh. I hope this has been compelling and interesting. If you've tried Bokeh before, a long time ago, please come back to it. If you're new to it, please try it out, let us know. And of course, if it's appropriate, we'd love to engage with people for helping them integrate Bokeh in their own projects. So let us know.
Any questions?
Yeah, there's a question back there. Oh yeah, so we did make the question was about touch support, if I heard it correctly. Was that correct? Yeah, so we did make a stab at that. That's actually something that's a bit hard to test in an automated fashion, and so I will confess now that in recent testing, I think it slipped a little bit. So I've put it on my list of things to check immediately. So some of it works right now. I think you can pan plots. I think, excuse me, some of the selection tools may be off a little bit, but there is the framework for that's there. There's just a few bugs to fix up now. So good question. Other questions? Yep. Yes, the question was about an offline mode, and by that I think you mean static headless generation of plots without a browser?
No, with the browser, but not getting remote data from the remote server through local, or once it's pulled the data, interacting.
Well, so Bokeh, most of the plots that I showed were static documents that have the data embedded in them, and so you can use all the interactive tools, panning, zooming, linked plots, linked interactions. You can do even sophisticated things like computing, values based on selections and updating a plot in a static document that you could email. So I'm not sure if that's exactly addressing what.
Well, you said that the data comes from the REST.
It can. There is the option, the ability to do that, but you don't have to. You can create a static document that has all the data included in the document. Yeah, sorry. That's a feature that you can use, but don't have to use. Yeah. Question?
Any plans to either use leaflet or any of the kind of things to do with mapping in Bokeh?
Yeah, so questions about mapping in Bokeh. Definitely interested in moving that forward. There's a lot of interest in GIS. Sarah Bird in particular is interested. We have some other new folks that are interested in GIS. So I will say I don't know exactly what their immediate priorities are in terms of moving things forward, but we do want to move it. She's very familiar with Leaflet. I'm not, but we definitely want to increase the GIS capabilities of Bokeh in the near future. So maybe one more?
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
one more.
Okay.
What's the status on network visualization?
Yeah, so the status there is that Bokeh can draw pretty much whatever graph you want. What isn't there now is, for instance, layout, either on the Python side or the JS side. But again, this idea of making the model system extensible is a really awesome one, because you could have, for instance, the ability to integrate, say, D3's network layout system easily in the client, so that you could actually send the graph as an abstract representation and then have it laid out in the client. So we're not there yet. You can draw a graph. If you lay it out yourself, you can draw whatever graph you want. But in terms of actually having sort of dynamic layout, that's a little ways off, but that is certainly on our radar. So.
Okay, there are a couple more questions, but I'd like to defer those to the break so we can
Yep.
carry on with the session. So let's thank Bryan.
Yep.